This is Ross Feingold coming to you from Taipei, Taiwan on the Taiwan Hashtag program hosted by Storm Media. Today we'll be talking about the largest political scandal in recent months here in Taiwan, cigarette smuggling on President Tsai's charter aircraft. President Tsai recently made an overseas trip where she transited New York City and Denver on her way in and out of the United States to visit 4 countries in the Caribbean that have diplomatic relations with the Republic of China on Taiwan. Unfortunately, within hours after she returned to Taiwan, a legislator from a small party, the New Power Party, broke the news that a member of the delegation that was on the charter aircraft had purchased 10,000, roughly, the numbers keep changing, duty-free cigarettes and had smuggled them into Taiwan for distribution to others. We're still trying to figure out who else was involved in this scam. However, this has now put a damper on the successes of the overseas trip. In fact, one could say that news about the president's overseas trip has gone up in smoke. And now the focus has been on her and her team's management of the presidential charter, the people who are on board, and the agencies involved. Let's take a quick look at the agencies involved. The person who's accused of purchasing the duty-free cigarettes and smuggling them into Taiwan is allegedly an officer of the National Security Bureau. The National Security Bureau is a small agency of about 1,500 personnel that engages in domestic as well as overseas intelligence gathering and reporting to the National Security Council. And the National Security Council reports to the president. So unlike other government agencies in Taiwan, which report to the premier, such as the various ministries, Ministry of Economic Affairs, Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Health, etc., all of those agencies report to the premier. Certain agencies dealing with foreign affairs and defense report directly to the president. There actually is a law that clearly sets out the obligations of the National Security Council as well as the National Security Bureau, and they are both housed within the presidential office. So the reporting lines are very clear, which for President Tsai means there are not significant layers of management between herself and the National Security Bureau. Now, to be fair to the elected officials and their most immediate appointees, the National Security Bureau here in Taiwan does have a legacy history of bad behavior going back to the martial law era. There are allegations that even until 2019, many of the personnel are partial to the Kuomintang. They are not supporters of President Tsai. There are allegations of leaks of information that are helpful to President Tsai's opponents and detrimental to President Tsai. No one's been prosecuted for that or even fired up to now under President Tsai's tenure. However, she has changed personnel at the National Security Bureau and the National Security Council several times in her 3-year presidency because of personnel shortcomings at the National Security Bureau. There have been a number of incidences involving sexual harassment, alcohol use. There was a discharge of a weapon by an officer in the protective detail in the presidential residence. So there have been personnel problems at this agency, and to her credit, President Tsai has sought to address those by changing National Security Bureau directors previously. However, none of those previous problems have turned into the scandal that the cigarette smuggling scandal has turned into. I think part of the issue here is the public in Taiwan, they're just general disgust that an official of the government agency who's involved in providing this important role to the president, intelligence gathering, protective details, security for the president when she travels, took advantage of the charter and the opportunity to go overseas to smuggle in cigarettes and did so at such a large quantity. So has this smuggling happened before? Yes, it seems that the previous presidential charter trips, whether it's President Tsai or President Ma, President Chen Shui-bian, recent presidents here in Taiwan, it seems that members of their delegations, whether it was personnel from the security agencies or other members of the presidential delegation, did take the opportunity to buy duty-free cigarettes. What's not clear yet, and the public should keep this in mind, is whether or not the previous purchases actually exceeded the allowable amount of duty-free cigarettes. So was it really smuggling, or was it only purchases of the allowable amount? We do know in this case the 10,000 cigarettes purchased by one individual far exceeded the allowable amount, which is why it's created so much controversy. So that brings us to the next issue that has kept this under discussion for so many days now, and that is the changing explanations from the government. Government you are not helping yourself by changing the explanations. And when we say government, who do we mean? We mean the presidential office. We mean the National Security Council. We mean the airline involved, the China Airlines, which is run by the government. The people who are senior management at China Airlines are actually political appointees. And what happens when political appointees are appointed? They bring in their friends, other people who are from the same team, from the same party. So actually, it's been in the news. It's a fact that a lot of senior management at China Airlines are political appointees or friends of political appointees. And that is not new in Taiwan. So, for example, when the new government took over in 2016, they replaced political appointees at many companies, and their new people are from their team. That's understandable. The previous government under Ma Ying-jeou did the same thing, and the government before Ma Ying-jeou under Chen Shui-bian also did the same thing. So we see a lot of political appointees who are now involved in the scandal, and their explanations have been changing. What kind of explanations have they provided? Well, there's been some very peculiar ones. There were government officials who called this just a over-purchase. They bought too much. Well, that's a nice way of saying they exceeded the allowable amount for duty-free cigarettes. There were some government officials who called it a large purchase, but a large purchase is actually not being very clear because they purchased more than they were allowed to purchase under applicable regulations. There are government officials who said, well, you know, it's a legacy issue. But here's the thing, saying that the other people did something wrong and it's been going on for a long time is not a justification for bad behavior today, especially when these people report to you or you appointed them. So you cannot get away from the problem by saying, well, you know, it's a long-running issue and it's a legacy problem. It's a bad tradition that existed at this National Security Bureau, or problems with their personnel, or legacy issues that have been left unresolved by previous presidents. Never a good excuse to blame the other people. You have to take control of the problem. We see President Tsai doing that because she has actually ordered people to be replaced. She's ordered a thorough investigation. Problem seems to be not necessarily with President Tsai, but some of the other people in the chain of command who keep coming up with these peculiar explanations. One of the ones that got the most criticism in Taiwan was when the chairman of China Airlines, who is a political appointee by the government, said that it was an overseas purchase. It was outside the jurisdiction of Taiwan. Now, everyone in our audience who's ever taken a plane has heard the announcement or seen the signs on the plane that, for example, if you smoke on the plane, you will be prosecuted. Who are you going to be prosecuted by? You're going to be prosecuted by Taiwan if you're taking a flight into Taiwan. Of course, on a flight back into Taiwan, Taiwan laws apply. You can't possibly say with a straight face that this was a purchase outside of Taiwan. The purchase was made pursuant to Taiwan law, was processed using the payment systems here in Taiwan. That's another issue, that the people who were on the charter were allowed to pre-purchase, and they were not required to take their purchase on board the plane. So they were able to pre-purchase before the plane left Taiwan, and they were able to pick up their purchase when the plane returned to Taiwan on the ground. So most of the cigarettes never even got on the charter aircraft. Again, not an excuse. Right? Nobody is taking this seriously when you said, oh, it was an overseas purchase and it was outside the jurisdiction of Taiwan. Right? That has gotten, rightly so, a lot of criticism here in Taiwan. So what next for this scandal? Well, the government needs to investigate and investigate thoroughly. Part of the challenge with doing that is people appointed to investigate are actually political appointees investigating other political appointees. One example would be the Ministry of Transportation and Communications, which controls a foundation that is the majority shareholder in China Airlines. The Minister of Transportation and Communications, a political appointee, sent another political appointee, his deputy minister, to go over to China Airlines and investigate this thoroughly and report back within a fixed period of time. That may work out okay, but obviously there's significant risks. There's another concern with the Taiwan version or similar agency to the American Federal Bureau of Investigation, which is called the Ministry of Justice Investigation Bureau. Again, it reports to the Ministry of Justice. The minister is a political appointee. This agency is one of the agencies involved in investigating the National Security Bureau. So in Mandarin, people say that this is like little brother investigating big brother. You basically have the Taiwan version of an FBI investigating a Taiwan version of a CIA. And maybe they're not going to go so tough on people who are from the fellow investigation community. That remains to be seen. we probably should give them the benefit of the doubt that they're going to be professional in their job and do a thorough job. The problem is the people above them, the political appointees, and whether they're going to let the investigation take its course and go wherever it needs to go. More people are probably going to be fired. In fact, it's fair to say more people need to be fired, not just at China Airlines or in the National Security Bureau or the National Security Council or the presidential office, but whoever was involved. And if the people deserve to be criminally prosecuted, no matter who they are, whether or not they're political appointees, whether or not they're civil servants, whether or not they're career employees of China Airlines, where people violated the law, not just did something that appears morally wrong or was inconsistent with their work responsibilities, they need to be prosecuted criminally. There should be no breaks for anyone who was involved in this. Why? Because it involved the president. It was on the presidential charter. It's completely wrecked the good news that came from a successful overseas trip. President Tsai had many successful meetings with U.S. government officials, business people in the U.S., firmed up relationships with the countries that recognize Taiwan, and that has now gone by the wayside because of the fallout from this scandal. So who needs to be fired? Who needs to be prosecuted? This needs to run its course without political interference. And the public in Taiwan, the media in Taiwan, legislators in Taiwan are rightly demanding that. And we should also keep in mind, again, as I mentioned earlier, this information came from a political party or a legislator who represents a political party that is normally very friendly to the government and often votes with the government. So it is not necessarily a partisan issue. However, Kuomintang will try to make this a partisan issue. That's something they need to be very careful about. Kuomintang has a long history of corruption, not just when they controlled the central government decades ago, but when they control local government, Kuomintang legislators, city councilors. There's certainly a lot of corruption that has historically occurred among Kuomintang politicians here in Taiwan. It's not something they could avoid. The moment they say corruption with the DPP is going to throw that back at them and say, you the Kuomintang, have a history of corruption as well. So saying that it's only a DPP problem, that's something that the Kuomintang will need to be very careful about. Another significant issue here that hopefully the people of Taiwan, the politicians, no matter which parties they represent, will come to a consensus on is whether or not there needs to be any reform in the National Security Council or the National Security Bureau. Because these agencies are so important to Taiwan's national defense and Taiwan faces a daily threat from the People's Republic of China, we cannot afford to have agencies that are constantly under investigation or where there are legacy cultural issues that prevent them from doing the job they're supposed to do. So hopefully we'll see a consensus across parties here in Taiwan with the media, with the public, that will be supportive of reform in the National Security Bureau, National Security Council, and let them do the job they need to do to keep Taiwan safe. I'm Ross Feingold. You've been watching Taiwan Hashtag on Storm Media.